Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading that day. This week our reading is centered around the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Today I'm joined by Sheryl Daughety and Alyssa Bream. We're going to look at a question from our reading, but since it's Monday, let's look at the theme of the book. Let me say this. Growing up, I think Revelation to me was more associated with end times. Like that's what in my mind. I don't know that what I heard from my dad and what I heard other places was completely different often, but I associate it more with the rapture and the tribulation. Those were kind of the two things that I associated it with. But a better theme is which we have recorded is the unveiling of Jesus Christ. Like this is the glorified Christ for all of us to rule and reign with and be with for all of eternity. And so it is a prophetic book that talks about Jesus. It represents this glorified and victorious King who's going to return to establish his kingdom on the earth. And the thing that makes Revelation so scary for some people is the imagery that it uses. You know, the symbolism that he uses to describe the end of the age. Is it necessarily going to look like he describes? Probably not. I would say it's going to be even better, but he's using this imagery, you know, that sometimes is scary and sometimes they're like, wow, how can that possibly happen? You know, that's going to be that fantastic. But he does talk about judgments, the overthrow of Satan, the ultimate triumph of Christ. And he instructs us to prepare or to be ready for the return of Christ and to be faithful and resist temptation and persecution so that we can keep ourselves pure in anticipation of his coming. So today, our reading is Revelation 2, verse 1 through 3 and 22. So these are the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And I could read all of the letters, but I'm not going to.
You could do that, and then we don't have to say anything.
Yeah, we wouldn't have a podcast, right? My question to you is, which one most resonates with you? Like, which one of these do you go, maybe it's because this is where you are, or maybe you've been in a particular place, or you think the church in America that you are part of resembles this, is the word I'm looking for.
The one that I thought of was Ephesus. And I think it was because it seemed to me he was saying to them, okay, you've done a great job at doing this. You've done a great job of identifying untruth and of finding the people who are teaching things that you don't want to be taught, that, they're not coherent with the Word of God. But they had, it seemed, forgotten the excitement and zeal and love that they had for Christ, which in return meant that they had forgotten how they were supposed to treat each other with that love. So it seemed like they were, trying to make sure they were doing things right, but maybe they weren't concentrating on all the right things. Maybe they weren't doing it with the right spirit, which I think can happen pretty easily in any church.
Well, I think where the church's Ephesus is, it reminds me when I read it of the environment that I grew up in, where like right was right and wrong was wrong, but some of the right and wrong was mean spirited. You know, it wasn't, there wasn't much love. I see that in the church today in a much different fashion, where we're trying to, if we believe we're on a right path, we are very dogmatic about it to other people, and it doesn't really matter what we believe that right path is, you know. And so, yeah, I don't disagree with that.
There were a couple different things that stuck out to me with these letters as I reread them. Smyrna and Philadelphia are the only two that aren't told to like change things. They're the only ones that are just given encouragement, and it's because they're suffering. And sometimes we look at the persecuted church and we feel, not that we shouldn't feel bad for them, but I think that whenever we personally go through suffering or wherever we're in a situation maybe where there is suffering, we have to realize what it produces and that it produces good things and that it helps us focus on God. It helps us remember our dependence on God. It purifies our intentions. And, we hate to have suffering in our life, but it really does serve a purpose. And the other one that I was looking at was Laodicea, because if you were to say what's something you remember from the letters, I always remember because you're neither hot nor cold, that will spew you out of my mouth, and I remember that being taught in Sunday school, and about how you should be passionate for God, and if you're cold, then at least you're away from God, and that's why he doesn't spew you. And it's like, no. And then once you know the history behind it, that they had hot springs to their north, and then there was cool mountain water, but neither was easily accessible.
Mm-hmm.
They built aqueducts and thought, oh, we could get this water. But
It
by
was
the time they
yucky.
got there, it was gross. It was lukewarm. They either had to reheat it or deal with lukewarm water. And so it was about usefulness. It was about being able to be productive in the kingdom of God, which just kind of gives that letter a different look than just being like, oh, I need to be passionate and, knocking down doors for Jesus Christ. It just gives it a different view when you know the history a little bit more.
In that particular letter, for me, what he talks to them about, because it was a center, a hub of commerce. They had developed. They were quite wealthy. This was not a church that was poor, which would have been unusual during that time, because many of them were persecuted and marginalized and didn't have a lot. They were wealthy, but that had become their source of security and strength. What they depended on, how they identified themselves, and that is one of the things that I have noticed over my life, and it certainly started well before I was born. But if you go back to the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, the majority of what we call evangelical churches today, whether they're Southern Baptist or the Pentecostal strains, those would be pretty strong evangelical churches even still today. They were poor people, uneducated people, struggling, people. By the time you get to the turn of the 21st century, the church is much wealthier. People have much more money. They live in nicer houses. Everybody's got a car. Everybody in the house has a car. Not everybody, has a car. Everybody in the house has a car. They're mobile. They go do what they want to. And one of the temptations or distractions of success is that it opens up options that we don't have when we're poor. Like, when you don't have any money, it's stay home or stay home, or go to church, kind of thing. But suddenly when you are successful, now there are other activities that you can do that are not bad. Okay. So they're not sinful. I don't think he's saying these things are sinful. I think he's saying these things make you lukewarm. They cause you to not fellowship with believers because you go travel. You got options for your kids to do. And I think wealth creates such distractions that take us away from our devotion to becoming disciples of Christ and our time of prayer and Bible reading and spending time with other believers. And when we do those things, we become lukewarm. It's not that we become cold. Like most of the people that I know I wouldn't consider them to be cold. But I know a lot of lukewarm people who are they're marginal Christians, and And I would attribute it to success that they have achieved here on this earth that give them options that they haven't worked around.
And that goes back even to the Smyrna and Philadelphia. When God is the only thing you can depend on, it drives you to that. And Christianity has always grown and flourished in the margins.
Mhm.
Like we hear about miracles in Africa and all of these things because as the word is getting preached there, it's to the people who are on the edges of society a lot of
Yeah.
times. And
That's
so
their greatest hope.
right. And so as people like pray for America to be following Christ, and that's not a bad thing, but it's like when we're on the outside a little bit, it makes Christianity much more powerful and potent. And it's not a bad thing to be not the state religion.
It's hard to say thy kingdom come, but keep us on the outside at the same time. So it's a real tension. The hard part, the challenge, I think, is that what Laodicea had. It is to be devoted to God and have power or success.
Mhm.
It's very, that is a real challenge. I don't think it's that you shouldn't or can't. It's just that it's the rare person that can handle it. Extremely rare person that can handle it.
I think it's pretty important for us to recognize that he specifically addresses each one of these churches, which, it tells us not only the importance of each church, but the fact that he knows the details and he sees the successes and the things that you have improved in, but he also wants more for us.
Mhm.
And I think, that's a really good thing for us to keep in mind because we are at a time right now when so many churches are struggling.
Mm.
And I am sure that in the worst of those times, it's easy for you to think like God hasn't seen any of the work that we've done or any of the advances that we've made for his kingdom, I think it would be easy to kind of fall into that mindset, but hopeful for us to see that he does see all the hard work that's been done and he understands, how hard you've worked to make a lot of that happen and that he loves you for it and he has more plans for you.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of Revelation.